mean, let me simplify what I mean by mystical theology, radical theology, and then you're right. There's definitely some mystics who fit within the radical, and Meister Eckhart is the main one. I would say, and using Jean-Luc Marion, who's a contemporary kind of Catholic philosopher, very good, wrote a book called God Without Being. I think he offers the best definition of a mystical approach to religion, where he says religious experience is the overwhelming of our cognitive and experiential faculties. This is similar, by the way, to the seduction theory in Freud. I want to kind of make a structural analogy between Freud's seduction theory of trauma and then how Freud moves from that to the really, which Lacan really develops, the idea that actually what makes something traumatic is not an overwhelming experience, but rather the question of the other's desire within the experience. So in fact, I'll talk a tiny bit about Freud for a second, and then I'll go back. So Freud's seduction theory is almost like trauma is when you're overwhelmed by something that you cannot symbolize. So a sexual encounter, whatever it is, but the child experiences something and they do not have the symbolic framework to make any sense of this. So Bion, for example, he calls these beta elements. A beta element is like something that happens to you. It's overwhelming. And then the alpha function is like, say, the mother. And the alpha function is, in a sense, to put language to the experience, to soothe the infant through language, which is a beautiful way of describing it, because then you say the parent is alphabeticizing. So, which is a beautiful phrase, you know, to alphabeticize. It's good. I know it's very good. So that's the alphabeticizing function. So in that notion of trauma, something overwhelming happens. You cannot symbolize it. So it returns in the real or whatever. That's similar to the mystical notion of religious experience. And what Marion does brilliantly is he uses the Kantian categories of judgment, quantity, quality, relationality, modality. And he says that if religious experience means anything, so he's trying to be a philosopher at this point, so he doesn't say it exists, but he says if religious experience exists, it overwhelms us at the level of quantity, quality, modality, and relationality. So he calls it saturation of saturation. That's Rudolf Otto's The Idea of the Holy. Now, in Rudolf Otto's Idea of the Holy, there's a line in it somewhere where he says, if you haven't had this experience, this book isn't going to mean anything to you. It's almost like if you've had that experience of saturation, then you've kind of got a sense of the holy, and then let's talk. If you haven't had it, you know, that's no harm, no foul, right? That's one of my issues with kind of the mystical experience. And in one sense, it's very few people seem to have it, and it only happens occasionally, right? Now, Paul Tillich, so you've got that hypersaturation. I don't think that's Meister Eckhart, but you've got that idea of hypersaturation. With Paul Tillich, who Thomas Altizer, who's the father of radical theology in the 20th century, he said Paul Tillich opened the door to radical theology, but didn't walk through it. But he's a precursor. So I want to very quickly talk about why Paul Tillich's a precursor. By the way, supposedly Altizer killed Tillich. Do you know this? They were at a dinner party arguing about, and Altizer was saying to Tillich, "You're a radical theologian," and Tillich was refusing, and then he had a heart attack. Was rushed to hospital and died. That's the story. I don't know if it's true. So yeah, Altizer says he killed Paul Tillich. But for Paul Tillich, his notion was God is the ground of being, not hyper being, but the ground out of which everything arises. And so Paul Tillich's theology says that the religious experience is you never experience God, because God is the ground out of which subject and object arise. So what is religious experience? Well, for him, he called it ultimate concern. He said what religious experience is it's the sense of being ultimately concerned with something that you cannot grasp. Right? Again, this has some connections with objet putia and all, which we can look at or not. But now Paul Tillich has changed religious experience to not an oversaturation of something that short circuits us, but rather this concern we have, say, for truth or beauty or justice. And then Tillich says there's false religion and true religion. False religion is when you think that you have the truth, You know, when you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. This is where you don't, where you think you've met the Buddha and you've got the truth, you've got beauty. The artist who paints a picture says, I've captured beauty, not I failed to capture beauty, not this constant failure that generates momentum, but I've got it. So that's false religion. And for Tillich, a true religion is an eternal openness to say truth. For the philosopher's truth, the artist is beauty, for the lawyer it's justice, whatever. But you're open to the truth, yet never feel you have it. And yet the failure to get it is what continues to generate something. Now, this is interesting because then religious experience, all of us have it. So suddenly it's all of us have it all the time. We can right now, through inward reflection, touch on our ultimate concern. And religious experience is not about presence, it's about absence. The reason why Paul Tillich, I don't think, is a radical theologian is because God is still substantive. So religious experience is now absence, but God is substantive. What Altizer does is says absence is in God as well, is in the absolute as well.